Hi everyone, this is Dr. Yoni Arthur. I'm an audiologist and strength coach, and I specialize in vestibular disorders. Welcome to my channel, The Steady Coach, where we talk about all things related to vertigo, dizziness, balance problems, health, and wellness. Today, I'm going to teach you how to build your own treatment plan for your chronic dizziness. This is something I get asked about a lot. Not all of you live in an area where you have access to people who can help you with your chronic dizziness, and not all of you have the financial resources to hire someone who could help you with your chronic dizziness. So today I'm going to teach you how to do it yourself. It is really helpful to have support through this process, so this is something that you could do with a trusted friend or family member as well. Step 1, make sure that there truly is no medical or structural problem that needs to be addressed. Now, if you're on my channel, chances are you've already had the doctor's visits, you've already done the medical testing to know that things are structurally okay. And you've probably already been diagnosed with something like Pppd, Pppd, or chronic subjective dizziness, MDDS, perhaps post-concussion syndrome without any structural damage. And you may have also been diagnosed with vestibular migraine or Meniere's disease. Now with the last two, there are medical treatments that may be available to help mitigate your symptoms. But unfortunately, many of the people who receive these types of diagnoses actually don't have a identifiable structural problem. They're given the diagnosis by a physician who isn't super familiar with these disorders, when in fact that person has what we call here a neural circuit issue. In other words, the brain or the central nervous system is creating the dizziness without a structural or medical problem causing it. So if you've been diagnosed with either of those, this still may be very valuable information for you. Step 2, understand that this is a neural circuit issue. I have covered this topic exhaustively in this channel, so I will link to a video where I go over this in the description below under step 2. Step number 3 is to start to reduce the alarm or danger signals that your brain is getting all the time. Now, for some of you, you only have dizziness when it's triggered, and for some of you, you have dizziness all the time. For all of you though, your dizziness probably changes depending on what you're doing, the time of day, your stress levels, or your activities. So you're going to start to reduce that alarm and danger signal in 2 ways. First, you're going to reduce your baseline stress level in whatever ways work best for you. These are things you're probably already familiar with, like taking walks if you can, getting a little bit of exercise or yoga if you can, getting enough sleep, the usual. But the other part of this is working on changing the relationship that your nervous system has with your dizziness. We want to teach your brain that there is actually no cause for alarm. And as such, this isn't something that you should expect to affect your dizziness levels right away. When you practice these techniques, you're not necessarily going to see a reduction in your dizziness below your baseline level for that day. But what you should be able to do is reduce your symptoms back to your baseline for a particular day. For example, if you have a particular movement trigger, you're going to apply these techniques to reduce the symptoms in response to that trigger to get it back down to your baseline for the day. So if you started at a baseline level of 7 for a day and then bending over turned it up to a 9, you're going to quickly apply these techniques to bring yourself back down to a 7. My favorite technique, as you know if you've been watching these videos, is parasympathetic breathing, which is a special style of deep breathing involving a relatively natural inhale and then a very long exhale. I'll link to a video below where I talk about that. And another wonderful technique is called somatic tracking. Again, I have a video on that as well that I will link to below. You can also take a more thinking or cognitive approach if you tend to find yourself getting caught up in patterns of thoughts that seem to make your dizziness worse, like I'm never going to get better, and this is terrible, and I don't know why my body's doing this to me. Then you should check out 5 minutes of Vestib numbers 1 through 4 about the dizzy voice. That would be a really helpful exercise for you. That will also be in the description below. There are a few other tools that are really helpful though, and I haven't talked about them as much on my channel because they're a little fluffy for some people, but there's really good scientific evidence behind using exercises that increase our compassion or kindness toward ourselves. And two formal ways of doing this are self-compassion meditations and loving kindness meditations. And I'll link to a few of my favorites below. Again, maybe a little fluffier than you're used to, but there's really good scientific evidence to show that this reduces stress chemicals in your brain, and that is exactly what we're trying to do here in step number 3. We're trying to reduce the alarm and danger signals that your brain is constantly bathing in right now. Step number 4 is to start recognizing the stressors that are in your life right now and starting to learn how to tea kettle. So tea kettling is a term that was coined by Dr. Rachel Zoffness, who is an amazing pain psychologist. And what she is referring to is that the stress within us tends to build up like water boiling in a tea kettle. Now, what happens to the water in a tea kettle? Steam will escape through the little vent on top. If we don't have that vent, what happens? The water boils over. So what a lot of you are experiencing with your dizziness is that boiling over of stress hormones. So step number 4 is to stop and pause and start to pay attention to your reactions to various things that go on throughout your day. I usually recommend a mini body scan, and this doesn't need to take longer than 10 seconds, just a quick check-in. Pause, where am I feeling the sensations in my body right now? Am I displaying signs of stress? And if I am, going back to step number 3 and using one of those techniques to bring the stress down. And if I'm not, fantastic, let's move on. You can even set alarms on your phone to go off throughout the day randomly to interrupt you, to remind you to do this. But this is a great habit to start building. Now, if you're really motivated and you really want to accelerate your ability to start recognizing how stressors in your life currently and in your past are affecting the chemicals in your brain and therefore your dizziness, there's a course called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction that was designed very specifically for people with chronic conditions and debilitating illnesses. So very much designed for people like you. There is a free version of the course online that I will link to below. It is absolutely life-changing. I have taken the course myself. It will teach you much more awareness of both how your thoughts are affecting you and how stressful body responses are contributing to your general sense of well-being. I will, again, link to that below in the description under number 4. Step number 5 is to incorporate vestibular-specific exercises. So there are plenty of beginners vestibular exercise progressions to be found here on YouTube. But it's not so important what you're doing. What's important is how you're doing it. The secret that no vestibular therapist will tell you is that there's nothing magical about the exercises other than they're a way for you to practice triggers in a systematic and safe way so that your brain can then learn to handle things on the outside. It's like training for a marathon. If you're training for a marathon, you wouldn't go run a marathon on the first day. You would start progressively taking longer and longer runs. You might even start a walk-run program if you weren't a runner before. So that's what vestibular exercises are for. But here's the thing. In order for them to work, they need to somewhat trigger your symptoms. And then the most important part is you learning how to control your body's reactions to those symptoms. Going back to step number 3. So you're going to do an exercise, recognize the symptoms in your body as a sign that you have poked the bear or increased the stress, and then use one of those techniques from step number 3 to bring the stress back down. And in most cases, the most efficient way of doing this is using that parasympathetic breathing method. But remember, I told you the secret already. You don't actually need vestibular-specific exercises because most things you want to be able to do in your life are vestibular exercises. Here are some examples. Walking around the house, gardening, cooking, cleaning, and then there are some much more challenging tasks like going to the grocery store or to a shopping mall. And those you'd want to reserve for later on in your progression. But what you do with each of these activities is you break them down into smaller and more manageable parts. So for example, if cleaning is something you want to be able to do and that normally triggers your symptoms, start to think about the types of movements you have to do while cleaning and start practicing those as an exercise, making sure to ground each time between the triggering of your symptoms. For example, let's say that just bending over the table to wipe it down after dinner is something that normally triggers you. You can practice just looking down at the table first. Then you can practice turning your head down and looking at the table. And then you can practice actually bending over to touch the table. And then finally, you could practice moving around while you're bending over the table and cleaning it. That is a vestibular exercise progression that you can come up with all on your own. Step number 6. Now, this is the one that my patients often need the most guidance through, because step number 6 is starting to work through how the experiences from your past have contributed to where you are right now. A lot of my patients have an inkling that their past experiences have contributed to where they are, but I guarantee you that the brain pattern that is making you dizzy was established long before you ever got dizzy. The groundwork was laid for you to get dizzy before you actually got dizzy. So many of my patients don't even recognize the patterns that led to their nervous systems being in that up position all the time. What I can tell you is this: most of the people I work with had their symptoms come on or get much worse after an extraordinarily stressful life event. And almost everyone I work with has a history of anxiety, some type of chronic pain, unexplained digestive problems, difficult relationships, and even trauma. If you don't, you're in the minority. But if you do identify yourself as having one of those experiences or one of those traits, those things lay the groundwork for dizziness becoming chronic. They make it easier for the brain to continue making the mistake of misinterpreting information coming in from the outside. The brain is more likely to make mistakes when it is enduring high levels of pressure, like the tea kettle. And brains that have been going through some of the things I just mentioned are under pressure. So one simple way to do this is to write down a list of experiences and relationships that you think may have contributed to where your symptoms are today. Then pick one and start writing about it. Start expressing the thoughts and feelings that you haven't necessarily expressed before. Start letting those experiences, feelings, chemicals flow. A therapist or a close friend may be really helpful at this point. If you want a systematic way of doing this, there's an amazing book written by Dr. Howard Schubiner, who is one of the pioneers in the field of mind-body medicine. And his book, Unlearn Your Pain, while it is pain-centric, it's focused on pain, has many chapters on how to do some of this going back, looking at the stress in your life, looking at the emotions, the relationships in your life, and figuring out how to let some of that stress out, how to tea kettle some of that stress out. I cannot recommend the book more highly, and I will also link to it below under step number 6. And step number 7, which is a little bit more of a bonus step. One of the most important things that you can do for yourself is start to develop what we call outcome independence, which means that you know that the work you're doing is going to help you even if you don't see changes right away. I know that the dizziness really, really sucks, and it's the hardest thing I'm going to ask you to do. But your brain needs time. As we talked about, your brain has taken a long time to develop this pattern, and likely it preceded the development of the dizziness in the first place. So it's going to take time to reteach your brain and give it a new way of relating to what's going on in your life. If you allow yourself to get discouraged and stop because you don't believe that it's going to get you better, then you're just reinforcing the danger signals in the brain. And that's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish here. So one thing that can really help is establishing very, very small goals. And by very, very small goals, I mean getting away from that idea that you're either dizzy or you're not. There are lots of places in between. Perhaps you start to focus on just remembering to stop and ground when you feel stressed. That is a worthy goal. You can focus on a goal like successfully bringing down your symptoms a notch or two when they are triggered. You can focus on specific activities that you'd like to do and start to layer on more steps like we talked about before. So look for progress, but don't expect that your journey is going to look like anyone else's, because I can guarantee it will not. You will get better. You will get better. I see it every day, but it's going to be at your own pace. So be patient with yourself. I hope that this video was helpful and it's given you some structure for how to build your own treatment program. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment, please like, please subscribe, please share it with your friends. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments, and I'll see you guys soon.